Welcome all to today's Passive House Alberta Building Better in Alberta webinar series, sponsored by the Alberta Eco Trust. My name is Frank Crawford, and I am the Education Committee Lead for Passive House Alberta. For the long-term attendees, you will by now have noticed that we have a new name and a new sponsor for our little webinars. And the goal of the Alberta Eco Trust sponsorship and the renaming was to expand the audience of the webinar to the full range of high-performance construction and passive house experience levels by adding introductory topics to our typically more advanced topics. But don't worry, the format stays the same. It's about a 30 to 40-minute presentation followed by an open Q&A session and discussion, because I always enjoy the discussions at the end. They're always the most interesting part, and we get to dive down into the deep corners. So if you have any questions, we'll leave them to the end. Please put them in the chat box, and we'll go over them at the end. If you don't like how I asked your question, feel free to put your hand up, unmute, and ask it yourself. So with that out of the way, today's presentation will be from Matt Grace, who is currently an independent sustainable strategic advisor after a very long and very long career in the commercial sustainability industry with a sustainability focus. And he'll be talking to us about Sustainability 101, kind of reminding us what sustainability really means, where it came from, and why it's so important. But before that, I'd like to ask Andrea to have a quick from our sponsor, Alberta Trust, to say a few words. Andrea?
Thank you so much, Frank. And yeah, just really quickly, I will talk briefly about NBICS and Alberta Eco Trust. So Alberta Eco Trust is a charity that leads and supports environmental and climate action projects in Alberta. And Alberta Eco Trust has two programs that support the building industry: NBICS, which stands for the Emissions Neutral Buildings Information Exchange, and the Alberta Eco Trust Retrofit Accelerator Program. So NBICS is a collaborative initiative of Alberta Eco Trust that brings the building industry together to share knowledge, build capacity, and support building and renovation practices across Alberta. And our goal at NBICS is to reduce emissions from new and existing buildings across Alberta. We do that by hosting events, sharing resources, and developing and strengthening the skills of people and organizations through things like training, peer-to-peer learning, and communities of practice. So we're really proud to be sponsoring these webinars by Passive House Alberta, who do such a great job facilitating discussion and education around high performance and passive house building principles. So I'll pass it back to Frank to get started.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Andrea. So now, take it away, Matt.
Okay, let me share my screen here. Is that all working for everybody?
Yep, looks great.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you very much. So what we've got today is, as Frank said, a Sustainability 101. I would also say I'm happy to be board member of Alberta Eco Trust, and there are lots of ways to get involved in that if you're looking for extra things to do. So today is a Sustainability 101. We're not going to be having a deep dive into what the efficiency of different heat pumps is. We can do that another time. We can do that at the end. Today we're going to be reminding ourselves of what we mean by sustainability, where we struggle with definitions and direction for sustainability, and the role of the built environment where we all work in. And I'm also very excited to say that we've got a little prize draw today. Maybe that's a first for these Passive House talks. So Dave Cheshire's someone I've tolerated my friendship and working habits for about 30 years. And he's just published his third book, it's coming on the screen there, which is about regenerative design. It's RIBA, so it's all proper, and it's just had a great launch in London. And out of my own pocket, I had to secure this prize. And then what Frank's going to do, he's going to make a note of all participants that are somewhat engaged in the conversation. So if maybe you've had your camera on most of the time, or you've asked some good questions, and at the end, Dave's going to reappear, and he's going to randomly select someone to win a copy of this book. So you've got an incentive to stay awake if there's nothing else. Fantastic. So I like to put up the agenda. You know who we are. First of all, we're going to talk about sustainability. It's one of these words that's used all over the place, but I think when we're getting stuck in the details of designing towards a goal such as Passive House, such as net zero, such as emissions neutral, we sometimes forget where we're coming from in terms of sustainability. So what I like to do is just do a recap and say, where did this come from in the first place? And let's make sure we're remembering it. So first opportunity to show that you're engaged is, does anybody know who this is? Maybe Frank, you can tell me if some guesses coming through on the chat. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Not yet. And I didn't know either. So
Let's have one or two guesses at least. Not you, Dave. You know who this is. Anything? Okay, so this is Gro Harlem Brundtland. Does anybody know who Gro Harlem Brundtland was? Still nothing, Frank?
nope, just David. Oh, Jeffrey's saying that she's from Norway.
Yeah, basically, yeah. So this was really part of the problem we have with when we're trying to move towards sustainability, and particularly sustainable buildings, is that it's still a fairly new definition. It's still reasonably new. So it was officially only launched in 1987, this first time that we had the term sustainable development published. So the two words on their own are well known and clearly defined, but when they're brought together, sustainable development is relatively new. And I personally use the word sustainability interchangeably with sustainable development. And what I like to do is just put up the summary definition of sustainable development and let everybody just pause on that and soak in some of the words in that core definition, which is coming up right now. So again, I'll let everybody take a chance to reflect on that and come up with any questions. And there are hundreds and hundreds of pages of definition behind this as well. And the core summary is this idea of sustainable development being one which satisfies the current needs of the society without compromising the needs of future generations. And I get different responses from different professions with this. The cost consultants tend to focus on needs. The designers tend to focus on other elements, but we can see we've got this almost a responsibility to focus on what we need right now, but not limit the ability of future generations to have that. So it's very powerful. Any comments on that at this point? Okay. The other thing you may have seen is this idea of sustainability being economic success, environmental success, and social success. Or the other one is people, planet, profit. So this is a simple diagram I put together to illustrate that. And I think it trips off the tongue a little bit nicer if we say people, planet, and profit. And what I'm trying to show in this diagram is on the left-hand side, we've got kind of business practice. We don't really care too much about the content of the buildings in terms of how they might affect people's health. We're concentrating on functional buildings. We're not really paying attention to whether we're inclusive or exclusive. In terms of planetary impact, we're doing very little to limit resource use, minimal legislation on pollution and harm to ecosystems. And we focus on profit, but we focus on profit of the initial instigators of the project rather than the long-term affordability and the cost of maintenance and the cost of adaptability. I'll be really interested to know if there are any other engineers or EITs in the audience, because actually built into the engineer's code of conduct is the idea that you are actually looking after the environment. And what I would suggest is moving towards sustainability. When we're looking at the people side of things, we should be designing for wellness. And I think this is you can see this on the screen. This is my son's favorite granola bar here. And we're used to the idea that on the side, got the focus on the side of any food items we buy, we've got the list of ingredients. And we're used to reviewing this and looking for a reduction in things that are perhaps not so good for us. But we don't expect there to be anything that's actively harmful in what we buy to eat. Whereas I would say in the construction industry, we're generally extremely ignorant and careless in what we put inside the buildings and whether they have an impact on health or not. Inclusion, we need to build buildings so that we're including all aspects of society. And I love this idea, which I grabbed from the Living Building Challenge, which I would very much encourage you all to go and have a look at. Why are we building anything if it's not going to create joy, not going to have some element of beauty, particularly when we're paying taxpayers' money? So buildings should be there for joy and for active health rather than just minimizing how much harm they're doing to us. In terms of the planet, we throw an awful lot away, so we need to move towards a circular economy. I'd like to propose that the built environment should be there as a tool for healing, not just looking for minimizing the amount of harm that we're doing. And the natural systems are all there. We know that the planet can do most of the things we need to. Let's look to that for inspiration. And in terms of profits are essential so that everybody can keep in business. But short-term profit is not going to help anybody. We need to make sure that what we're building is affordable, is adaptable to changes in use, to changes in climate, and so on and so forth. Okay, so now we've stated the problem. Let's look at the role that our industry has. Oh, problem. Okay, so you've also seen this stuff before. This is from my website. I managed to get this little CO2 reader built in there. We've all seen the data here, and you can go and you can actually get this live data on what the average CO2 is. It doesn't look good. We will ignore the climate change deniers in terms of saying that this is just weather and the climate has changed before. It's the rate of change that is the problem, and it is the amount of energy that is being trapped inside our atmosphere and how that's creating erratic systems. I've got a few myth-busting sections on my website if there's anybody there that's dealing with any of these climate change deniers. You can see why one of the most popular arguments against the need for change is that the carbon dioxide is such a small part of the atmosphere. I was shocked when I found this out, and I had the luxury of time to do a bit of research. It's actually only 0.04% of the atmosphere. And you can go to my website, and I did a little bit of research and collected some information to counter that argument. So please go there. All right. So the rate of change is not sustainable. And we all know what the corner that we need to turn is. And we've seen all graphs like this. This is from IPCC. And we can and we need to turn the corner very quickly. We've seen lots of interim targets of 50% reductions in emissions. And the interesting thing is that economically, it's always made sense. And this goes back to the Stern report from an economist in the United Kingdom, maybe coming up to 12, 15 years ago, who actually was not an environmentalist, was not a climate scientist, purely looked at moving towards net zero from an economic point of view, and everything made sense. So there's actually a lot of benefits to taking climate action right now. Any questions at that point? All right.
None so far. Carry on.
I'm carrying on. All right. So hopefully we've now got consensus that we know common language of sustainability and where that came from. And we just had a refresher on the state of the problem and the need to take action on reducing emissions. But how significant is our industry? How significant is the construction industry? I did a talk for the International Architects Association a couple of years ago, and I actually started looking into the number of buildings that we have in the world. And what we see from this graph, dating back from 2019, and it was surprisingly difficult to find out global figures for this information. Our floor area has gone up year on year, and we had a little dip there when emissions leveled, but now they started creeping up again. So the contribution of the built environment is not going down, and the rate of change we're getting from regulatory changes, from new building codes, it's a fraction of what we need to do. So as part of this talk I did on existing buildings, I'm expecting Andrea might be interested in this as well. The best estimate I could come up with was that there were around 1.7 billion buildings in the world. And that was a little survey they did of just a small proportion. So we've got a huge challenge, and we're very focused on reducing emissions in existing buildings. So we can't do it without tackling the existing buildings. Also, when we look at a bit closer to home in terms of Canada, what we build now, we're going to be stuck with. So we're not going to build our way out of this by doing new buildings. So around about half of all the buildings that we have will still be in use by 2050. So we'd better do what we can with those. And then we're also seeing that we're only replacing the building stock by, at the best, 1% a year. So the role of the existing building stock is very, very significant here. I'm also kind of interested in the global piece of the energy pie and the emissions pie of our building sector. So this next one is fairly complicated graph, but I borrowed this from an energy guru that I found through LinkedIn. So it might be a little bit tricky to read this one, but I've started to really appreciate the Sankey diagrams. So 2018, this chunk down here, am I marking this up or not? Or annotate, here we go.
Yeah, we can see your mouse.
This chunk down here is buildings. And we're seeing that the total electrical generation is going to more than double. And the buildings role is still huge. So I've seen estimates globally of the amount of energy and the emissions associated with buildings, anywhere between 30% and 60%. And you could argue it's much at the higher end, because where we choose to locate our buildings and the transportation infrastructure we choose to put between our buildings is going to impact on this whole transportation section as well. And then I could say that a lot of the materials that we manufacture are for building and maintaining buildings. So I could also claim a big chunk of this for the built environment. So I think actually the role of the built environment is usually understated when you think about the number of different end uses that it impacts. So if we're going to be renovating or designing our buildings using materials that have to be transported across the world, the transportation is going to be significant. One of the other facts, just as a bit of an aside, I've been aware of this fact on the transportation for a little while, the maritime. but I've seen it being circulating recently on social media. Around about 40% of all ocean-going vessels are transporting other fossil fuels. So it's a really bizarre system that we're in right now. And as the other thing is, as we're moving towards electrification, we've got a lot of infrastructure improvements to make, and it doesn't work unless the buildings are passive house or near passive house or net zero, or I would argue net positive. So that's where I'd like to go. So everywhere you look, we can't achieve success in tackling climate change without the building sector contributing. The other source I like to reference. Oops, how do I get rid of these?
Hit the clear annotate button on the annotate bar.
Clear annotate. Do I just hit the? Oh, there you go.
Delete all
there
comments.
You go. Look at that. Learning on the job here. Thanks, Frank. So I love this graph because it's not from buildings people. But what we have here is global emissions. So up here we've got gigatons of CO2 equivalent per year. I wouldn't worry too much about the different shades on the graph. But what we see is that we're the biggest. So we're number one. Everyone, round of applause there. So if we did everything else and we ignored buildings just from this graph, again, I think I'm going to claim for us at least a chunk of this. I think I'm going to change probably a chunk of this waste here as well. And I'm probably going to take materials, which is not showing up on this graph. But every way you look, every independent study, buildings is the biggest chunk, the biggest opportunity for savings, and the biggest impact when you take one particular sector. So I find it kind of empowering. I find it a little bit intimidating, but I also find it kind of reinforces our call to arms to tackle this. Any questions at this point? Okay. Dave, nobody wants to be in the prize draw for your book. I'm going to have 2 copies. All right. So hopefully by now we all agree on a common language of sustainability. We know we've got a big problem. We probably knew that already. We know that we have to act in terms of the construction industry. And how do we know if we have a sustainable building? So let's have a look at that. And this is really where all of the frameworks for sustainability, and I'm using that term broadly, starting with BREEAM back in the UK. Dave and I both worked with the original authors of BREEAM, and they started to say, let's have a global approach to this and try and have a simple framework of what we mean by sustainability in terms of a building. Can anybody tell me what this graph is showing? Everyone's feeling shy. I like to put this graph up. I do have a reference here, so it's a verified source of information. But we can see that, it's approximate. So we don't necessarily treat this data with a lot of respect. But I like to put this graph up to see if people are paying attention, and also because there is a lot of nonsense out there. One of the problems we have with sustainability is that people will make claims and they're not always verified. We've seen that with the latest greenwashing bill and the problems that that's caused. But this shows that there's just an approximate link between global average temperature and the number of pirates. So we need to bring back pirates. And then we go into some real claims. And this next one is a real poster. So I did actually have a meeting this morning talking about affordable housing. We'll maybe touch on affordable housing here in Calgary, and Lee, who I was meeting, said, "Is that my Hummer outside?" Is it a bit of a joke? And it wasn't. I don't have a Hummer. But I'd love to know if anybody thinks this is sustainable. Is this green? Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. Maybe the next best vehicle for the job, maybe that does 40 miles to the gallon. No, that would be better, wouldn't it? Maybe it's 10 miles to the gallon. So maybe this Hummer, maybe it's made locally. Maybe it's the smallest, most fuel efficient vehicle that somebody could find for the job. So maybe it is. Maybe it is the best solution. We don't know. So it's not always clear cut. And then if I go to the other extreme, I've got the bamboo bicycle in a green field by the bubbling stream next to the mountains. So surely this is sustainable. But maybe it's being made in a factory over here. And maybe the factory is polluting toxic chemicals into the stream. And maybe the fish are dying. Let's do a dead fish. Maybe the fish are dying there. Maybe they've got child labor in here. This is why I'm not an architect, you see. Maybe there's the child labor inside the factory being made to work in unsafe conditions. And it does happen, particularly with our clothing industry. So we don't necessarily know. You know, maybe the glues that are making the bamboo stick to the metal components, maybe they're highly toxic. Maybe they're using very rare materials. So it's not always clear what is sustainable. And when we get down to kind of very relevant definitions, the recent vogue has obviously been net zero, and we've heard from Andrea. We've got the emissions neutral building project from Alberta EcoTrust. There are even lots of definitions in terms of net zero, and I'm sure you've seen all of these before. So I'll just pop a couple of those up. So even when you're working on your projects and the client wants or has a requirement or has an aspiration to be a net zero building, that might not be clear. And I have worked on a few projects where the funding requirement has been net zero, but what we find is that it's not properly defined. So they've struggled to actually meet that requirement because they haven't set out what's included and what's not included. So hopefully that resonates with a few people. But really, coming back to this theme of the built environment being a tool for getting us towards a better situation in terms of climate, the goal should not be net zero. This, I would argue, should be the minimum requirement. Why should we have a granola bar that has any toxic chemicals in it? Why should anything inside my favorite granola bar, sorry, my son's favorite granola bar, why should that cause any negative health impact at all? So really the goal is buildings and a built environment that is starting to cause positive environmental impact. So for too long, and I have taken this from Living Building Challenge, I would very much recommend go and explore the Living Building Challenge. Many of these concepts of regenerative buildings and living buildings are in Dave's book, which one of you is going to win today. But for too long, we've had this approach where we've got the code minimum. Congratulations, your building is code compliant. You will not go to jail by building this building. That's fantastic. Then we've had this idea of green, which is generally a bit less worse than we normally do. So again, congratulations. And then we get to this idea of high performance, which tools like LEED and BREEAM and Built Green, they've all really helped in making an improvement in the limiting the damage we're doing. I would argue when we get to sustainable, we're now at zero impact. If you think about the core roots of the word sustainable, we're now not doing any harm. But let's push that forward. Let's have zero negative impacts as a minimum. Let's start to have buildings that actually contribute more clean energy than they use, that actually take materials out of landfill or divert them from landfill, actually include workforce, labor, give opportunities to people that might not get them otherwise, and actually contribute to clean water as well. All of this is possible. None of the problems that we have, the challenges are technical. We know how to do all these. So before I jump into the final section, I will just see if there's any questions again.
None as of yet. I think it'll be more of a discussion
Fantastic.
at the
Okay.
end.
Oops, clear my drawings again. So like I said, I wanted to make this very simple. Okay, so opportunities and takeaways and challenges. So we're now at the stage, we all know what we mean by sustainability. We all know why there's urgency. We understand the responsibility that we have as people working in the construction industry. We understand there's a bit of a challenge in terms of defining what's sustainable and what isn't. But what can we do, and what are the opportunities there? Again, I like to look for references outside of our industry directly. And this is a study from a few years ago by McKinsey. You may have seen this one before. Quite a lot of information to take on here. Essentially, we've got cost over here. If it's below the line, you're saving money. If it's above the line, it's costing you something. So you can tell this is a little bit older, but LEDs save you money. Efficiency saves you money. Wind power costs you a little bit. PVs, this has come down quite a lot now. And then we're, as an aside, carbon capture is not helping. In the wider review of this study, it showed that most of the things we need to do to reduce our carbon footprint, they actually save you money. And there are lots of other things like this. There are many resources that give you a global approach. And overall, when we're moving towards net positive buildings, it's not really costing you that much money. A couple of years ago, a colleague and I did a study specifically for Alberta. And we did a few different archetypes. And what we found is that there was this is for net zero, we found there was somewhere in the range of 5 to 10% premium. And the problem that you typically find, that the most common pitfall, is that we're adding, when a design team is asked to move towards net zero or net positive, they usually pick out the design that they did last time and build from there. A few years back, I had a client who'd moved from the automotive industry into buildings and was a client for buildings. And he told me, after working with him for a few months, he said, your industry, i.e. the building industry, is really backwards. We're really slow. So when you design a new vehicle, they would typically set out all the operating parameters, the design performance. Let's say we want to carry 5 people and this amount of luggage, and I want to be able to go this distance at this speed, and these are my crash safety ratings. And then a design team would design the car to meet those requirements. And he could not believe the practice we go through typically in construction. He said, everyone's pulling out the last garbage they did and trying to modify it. So it was basically they were trying to pull out a minivan, a soccer mum's minivan, and add upgrades to make it into a Formula One car. And he said it's never going to work because you're always adding things but never taking something out. So typically, what we see is the problem is we're adding insulation, but we're not taking out HVAC systems, and we're not downsizing the mechanical rooms, and we're not taking the savings back. So, and I would also argue that 10% premium for a building that is net zero is really not that significant. And we've all seen this approach. We can go into a bit more detail. There's a hierarchy here. We want to start by making the building as efficient as possible. So this is very similar to what we do with Passive House. But we're only putting the renewables on once we've made everything efficient. So there's a hierarchy of approaches there. We were just having a conversation before the official talk started. We're seeing with heat pumps are coming in. I've got a hybrid system in my house. I've got a small heat pump that feeds into my conventional furnace, and not one of the HVAC contractors asked to look at the rest of the house or asked to look at even the ductwork. So if you're not looking at it as a whole system, we're not going to get too far. All righty. So trends and takeaways. Everyone's done really well. You're onto the final stretch. So can anybody tell me what this is? Okay, so this gentleman is ironing a shirt here. And this is taken from the website of the Association of Extreme Ironers. And their stated mission is to combine the satisfaction of a well-pressed shirt with the adrenaline rush of extreme sports. And I put this slide up just to echo what we tend to do with sustainability. Well, maybe it's not us, but maybe it's outside this room. Several times a year, I get asked if a product is sustainable, or if a particular piece of equipment is sustainable. I once was asked to review a document that was a sustainable pump, and the term sustainability has got real meaning, but we've been in danger of using it frivolously and just adding it to everything. In the same way that if you're old enough, you'll remember when suddenly everything became extreme, like extreme ironing. There was a time when MTV was getting big. We could no longer just go mountain biking or roller skating. Everything became extreme. We had extreme in front of everything. So be careful when you see claims of sustainability, and also look at the wider context. So if you stick maybe with the heat pump example, if you're putting a heat pump on a design, what else is happening with that heat pump? Where is the heat pump coming from? Can the operators maintain that heat pump? Do they understand what it's doing? Are we missing out something else because we put more money in the HVAC system? So we've got to think about it overall. And the good news is we've got resources. So I'm going to come back to NBICS. And we've got, if you haven't checked this out yet, go and look at NBICS. We've got lots of vetted information, as in it's been checked that it's accurate. Lots of events, lots of good information. So the challenge in moving towards net positive buildings, the barriers are not technical, and they're not for a lack of information. There's plenty of this out there. And then I want to come back to the people. As I said, I'm an engineer. I found when you turn things off, they use less energy. And I double checked this, so it definitely works. And I just want to remind you a recent event we had in Calgary. Everybody remembers the water mains. So I took this off the City of Calgary website. So we had 3 catastrophic water mains breaks, and then we had to suddenly reduce consumption. So we got into the stage 4 water restrictions, and we managed to take our consumption down like that. I don't remember anybody having any health issues. Maybe we were a tiny bit smellier because we didn't shower quite as much. We didn't water the plants quite as much. And there are lots and lots of examples with this where we see the biggest impact is the human interaction. So if you're putting in the best piece of technology that you're most proud of, and you're not understanding how it's going to be used by the occupants, I would argue you're going to be really hit and miss on whether that's going to be a well-operated building. You have to understand how things are going to function, how they're going to be maintained, how the occupants are going to interact with what you're putting in there. So I take this as a good news story, and I do like good news stories. And so amongst all the calls for urgency and the desperate things we see on climate-related events, we do have lots of opportunity. Really good news story for me, originally based from England. England, the start of the Industrial Revolution, has gone down to zero coal. And as far as I know, the world didn't end there. Everybody still got enough power and things like that. And so this has happened just steadily. I didn't contribute to it particularly, but what we're saying is that we can transition, and it is very doable. And we're seeing this around the world. So what we've got ahead of us is we've got a model for more sustainable buildings. Good news is it's cost effective. It all interacts with everything else. So we're coming back to, let's just do a recap here. We're somewhere in the region of 40 to 60% of all of the emissions. We have to change something because it's impacting a lot of problems. We haven't even talked about insurance. You know, we're talking about technical and non-technical problems. When the insurers don't insure your buildings because you haven't addressed the climate hazards, we haven't even talked about climate hazards, you've got a problem. And then the good news is, just recapping on this, it doesn't cost any extra. If you do it properly, and we're not just adding on bells and whistles and doing the eco-bling, moving towards sustainable net positive buildings that are contributing towards action on climate change, is actually helping out. So I've got a little summary of those points there, just to wrap up. First point I'd like to make is that sustainability is a dynamic goal. So just because you designed something one way for one project, that could not be the same thing for the next one. I'll come back to affordable housing. We've got a housing crisis here in Canada, particularly in Alberta. If we build something just, let's say, 5% more costly because it means it's going to be net zero, but that denies even one family a roof over their head, is that ethical? Is that sustainable? Are we ignoring the people side of things? I don't know. We've seen the urgency for renovation. It's harder. It takes a bit more thought. There are more barriers, there are more problems, but this is why we've got such a shift and an urgency on emissions neutral buildings and the retrofit accelerator from Alberta EcoTrust. We build most of our buildings for people. So if you're ignoring the people, then we're not doing our jobs properly. Like I said, things use less energy when they turn them off. Electrification is clearly the way to go. It's not straightforward, but it has to be done. And lastly, something I found out quite incredible. I was working on an institutional building here in Calgary, and the mechanical engineer referenced the appropriate guide from ASHRAE, and the weather file was from 35 years ago, and he was designing the mechanical systems to cope with plus 28 in the summer. And that was the code. So he was doing everything per code as he should do, but the codes are not going to help us. And then just because I like my diagram, just put this last one up again as a little summary. And that's now we can go on to some questions. No, first thing we'll do I'll take it as a virtual round of applause and cheering, as we're all remotely. First thing, I'll take a list from Frank, and then maybe Dave, I could get you to unpause yourself. And Frank, you can tell us how many people you have on the list.
One, two. There's about 8. Well, actually, recently there's been a lot more popping up. So maybe actually we delay this, delay the award a
Okay.
little bit longer. So some of the easier questions, I guess, were so these graphs, were they just Alberta based or the world in general? I believe most of the graphs you show were kind of the world in general, not just Alberta based. And then a lot of the other conversations that's going on is, I guess, kind of your contrarian arguments or some of the questions about costs. And maybe we'll start with the question on cost.
Yes.
So, and this all comes back to education. So there is the impression out there that, and even the 5 to 10% that you put out there, that it costs 5 to 10% more upfront capital cost to build to a high performance and passive house level. So I will maybe give one response, and then I'll let yourself, maybe some other people on the call might also want to answer. So right now, I know of in Calgary high performance builders that can build a net zero or certified Canadian Home Builder Association certified net zero building for around $300 a square foot, which, as far as I've been told, is about the same average or same range that a code minimum building can be built. So it can. And as Matt mentioned, it's all about the whole building as a system. You can't just take a design and make it better. You have to start from the very beginning with that as the end goal in mind. But it can be done. Those that saying it can't be done are the ones that haven't taken the training, haven't done the education, haven't learned. So that's my answer. I guess, Matt or others, do you have other answers
Yes.
to that?
Well, I'm going to come back to that, and I'm going to give you a real world example. I love that question. I think a lot of it depends on the question and how you ask it. If I ask a smart room of people, find me all the costs associated with getting to net zero or net positive, they will find a lot of costs. If you flip that around, and this is basic psychology, and you say, find me a way to get this to net zero without any additional cost, this is my budget, then the effort's going to go in there. And the analogy I used on a project I looked at a few years ago was Apollo 13, right? Everyone's seen Apollo 13, and Forrest Gump's flying through space. Is it Forrest Gump? And they've got
Same
13
actor, yes.
amps left to turn all the power on. They don't have a choice, and it's challenging, but it doesn't cost them any extra amperage because that's all they've got. So they find a way, and they get creative, and it gets a little bit messy. If you turn the challenge round, here's your budget, get me this. All the creativity goes into that. And my real example I'll give you, it's kind of adjacent to this. We're asked to do a detailed submetering plan for a building, and the cost came back, and it was quite excessive. And then once you got into the detail, there was I'll be generous and I'll say there was accidental double counting, and about half the meters were required by law or before we even started looking at this submetering. And so if you ask people to look for something, they will tend to find it. So if you say, find me costs associated with this, you'll end up doubling up in costs and taking a precautionary principle. If you say, find me a cost neutral solution to going carbon neutral, that's where the energy goes and getting creative. But,
Yeah, I like that answer. It depends on how you're asking the question and where you're providing your goals are. So it always starts with the goals.
Anyone who's a parent knows that.
Yeah, that's
how you ask the question.
Some of the other questions kind of came around, again, bigger picture, because Canada has a relatively small impact on the global climate. And then this is the comment: if China and US and India are not doing this, why should we? So
I love that question. And it's the same argument I use for us not having any regulations on ivory trading or child slavery or domestic abuse. Take your pick. illegal drug trade, um, drink driving. You take your pick. I'll use the same argument. And also, if we're gonna if we want to go the other way, and you look at China's record in accelerating the move towards renewable energy, it's phenomenal. Thank you very much. So I will take that argument either way, and I'll flip it back to you, and I'll say that I will take the same argument. You know, Canada's got a tiny proportion of drink driving cases, so I am no longer going to regulate how much alcohol I have when I'm driving. But then if you want to flip it the other way, China, I would say, is exemplary in terms of what they've done in terms of particularly PV solar
Yeah, yeah.
and
So
transit.
yeah. So I just put up that graph. I think you should be able to share the screen. So yes, China has had exponential growth in the amount of solar PV that they are installing. I believe they are also reducing the amount of coal that they
Yeah.
are burning. So yes, the big ones are moving in the direction because and China does it probably for economic reasons. They see the economic benefit, and the part of the economic benefit is having a habitable climate and not having floods and all these other things. But yes, China, India, US, we'll have to see, but China, India are moving in that direction. So we need
But
to,
not Alberta right now.
unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, we are kind of the laggards.
Oh, well, we were.
And yes, and this one's old. This one only goes to 2012. It's the first one I found.
And EVs as well. I
Yes.
saw a write-up of just what BYD has done in terms of a company and how big BYD is. So I think 2 or 3 years ago, they weren't making any electric vehicles. And now I think maybe they're the biggest. They just overtook Tesla. And they just said, right, we're gonna take 1,000 engineers and they're gonna work full time, the best engineers. So
Yeah. So I think actually some of the comments that are coming up, the contrarian comments, are kind of reinforcing the need for MBEX, reinforcing the need for Passive House Alberta, because as Matt, you said, and as those that are in the industry, there are no more technical challenges. We know how to do it. It's just getting the information on how to do it out to enough people so that they can start doing it and make it simpler for them to do it, de-risk it.
Heat, the flow of heat is fairly well documented. The use of electricity is fairly well documented. And it, you know, if you turn stuff off, it uses less energy. So let's try not, if you don't even build it in the first place. So if you can find a way of making your building be a little bit smaller, but be more effective in terms of the space, that's even better.
Yes.
So something, this was another thing I was going to put up way back when I was studying, was it 1992? I had a professor there who did this little booklet and this thing called The Age of the Blip. And it's been replicated a bit. He was a bit of a nutcase, but lovely guy. And he said, well, if you look at our trends on terms of population, in terms of consumption of energy, consumption of resources, everything's got to follow a blip. So we've got to come down the other side somehow in terms of the rate of use of all our resources. And we choose how smooth that ride is. We either embrace it and say, okay, let's get creative, let's be positive, let's put the energy into creating solutions, or we just wait until we take a really unpleasant bump. I saw Cuba's got a blackout right now. I don't know if that's related to how that's happened, but you know, blackouts, brownouts, people having issues, that kind of thing.
All right, so we got 10 minutes left, and we'll still continue the conversation. But I think that there's been about, we'll call it 10 people have been fairly active in the chat box. So I guess Dave or Matt, just pick a number between Dave, pick a number between 1 and 10, and that's how we will award the book.
Oh, I had a name I thought was contributing lots.
Yeah. Oh, okay. If you it's your book. If you want to do it by whoever you like the contributions best, by all means, let's do it that way.
Yeah, I had Lisa Vargi down. Vargi.
Okay.
Sorry, I forgot her name.
Perfect. Yeah. All right, so maybe Lisa, stick around a few minutes at the end. We'll just get your contact information and we will send you the book.
I didn't even
Um,
get a discount, I'd like to point out, Dave. I
Yeah,
had to, I had to order, it's not even arrived yet. So
I'll bring one over next time. Well, next time you come over, I'll give you
no,
one.
I've ordered them now. Are you in Calgary, Lisa? You
I,
are.
bel I believe she is, but I'm not sure.
No, I'm in
Um,
Edmonton.
Okay,
we'll figure out a
that's
way to get it to
doable.
you. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess one other good kind of question that came up, because it kind of brings back to how everyone, again, impacts and uses this. So what are some of the benefits that we can use when we're talking to people, or when they say, why would using less energy, or why building to higher performance, why would that actually benefit me? How would that help me? What are some, I guess, ammunition that we can give to people to help fight this fight, have these conversations around sustainability that we are having?
Yeah. That I love that question as well, Frank. And I think it very much depends on who you're talking to, and what you got to read the room a little bit there. So if I'm amongst friends like I am here now, I kind of like to challenge our whole industry, and how dare we do anything that is causing any harm? And as if you're an engineer, it's built into your code of conduct. So if we're amongst friends and we're all on the same side, I'm saying, you give me a good reason why you should do anything other than do something that's kind to the planet. If we're talking to designers that are unconvinced, you need to kind of maybe walk them through and show that good detail is not necessarily more expensive. If you're talking to the clients, again, it depends on whether they're owning the building long term or whether they're going to flip it. So the argument changes. If you're dealing with potentially people who are more susceptible to illness, then the healthy side of sustainable buildings is the angle to take. So that's what I found in my years, is that you can easily, and this is actually perhaps the best answer, it's really easy to overwhelm someone when you're saying all these things we've got to do in terms of being sustainable. But don't worry about everything. Let's just find the hook that gets someone on board. So you don't have to sell, if you sell every single aspect, you just have to find the hook of sustainability that resonates with whoever you're talking to.
Yeah, I think for homeowners, the comfort and the indoor air quality, and maybe the lower maintenance, is a good way to do it. I guess adding to the cost conversation is, especially residential and even commercially, no one buys a house for cash. It's all about
Yes.
the mortgage. So then
Yes.
the better conversation is, what is the cost of the mortgage plus the cost of the monthly utility bill? So what is your monthly cost of ownership of that building? And that's really what we're trying to minimize. It brings in the operation cost. It's not just the upfront capital.
Yeah.
Obviously stuff to get the mortgage,
Yeah.
but thinking about the monthly cost of mortgage of ownership. And then the other way, going back to your turning the lights off analogy, is if it's going to cost 5 to 10% more to build high performance, why don't we build the house 5 to 10% smaller?
There you go. Yeah.
Like, do you really need all that space? There's another graph that you could look up that shows the size of homes versus time. And I think this is leading to a lot of the problems, because it shows that in 1970, the average size of home in Canada was 1,000 square feet. And I think in 2016 or 2018, it had already doubled to 2,000 square feet. And since then, I think it's done nothing but to go up. So
Holistic approach. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
I just saw Lisa's comment. It's definitely holistic. Everything should be holistic. But I think when you go fully holistic, it's really easy to overwhelm someone, particularly if they're not already familiar with a lot of the issues. I'll give you two quick little examples. I've been advising some friends who are building a net positive home, solar panels everywhere, electric vehicle charging. And sat down with them, and I said, well, what surface are your kids going to be eating their food off in the kitchen? And the kids are going to be playing on the floor. What's in that? And they had no idea this was even something to think about. They had no idea there might be any construction products that you're allowed to put in a home that might have anything toxic. So then we started looking at things like the Red List and Declare, and it was a revolution. So when you start talking to someone about their young children and where they're going to be, little kids will lie on the floor and lick whatever surfaces and eat food off anything. That was revolutionary. Another simple example, I'm advising another client who's building just out of Calgary and institutional. And it took maybe 3 conversations until the owner's face lit up at the idea of being off the grid in terms of water. So to Lisa's point, they didn't have a water supply to the site, and now we're looking at having water treatment systems and having it so that they don't have to bring in expensive water systems to the site and out the site. And that was what was getting her excited. So if I can crack that nut, I think I can sneak in a really airtight building envelope and heat pumps, and solar panels and healthy materials, but I have to get that first one there. So you got to find the thing that people get excited about.
Yeah, it's the how to sell it is kind of the key part. It can be done, just figuring out how to sell it. And with that, we're getting to right near the end of this month's Passive House Alberta Building Better in Alberta webinar series. So thank you, Matt, very much for your insight and your chat today. Thank you, NBEX, for sponsoring us. We'll be back again next month. The 4th Tuesday of the month is kind of the reoccurring time for these. Great to see. We had almost 50 people here, so lots of people. Good conversations. It really is about the conversations and opening people's minds to what's out there and giving them the resources to then go and actually do the work.
And I will just give a shout out to Green Drinks. If anybody's in Calgary, first Friday of the month, Green Drinks down at the James Joyce Pub from about 4:30. Next one, November the 1st, sponsored by Remedy Engineering. So everybody gets their first drink for free. So see you there if you're interested in chatting about any of this kind of stuff.
Yep. Oh, and I see a last minute question coming about where we can find a list of healthy materials. So obviously there's the Red List, which is on the Living Buildings Challenge website. Also, SARIA, SSRIA, will be coming out more locally with a product directory fairly soon, which will give us a list of products. And Passive House Alberta is actually working on another grant project to kind of add some of the embodied carbon accounting for these items. So yes, there's more lists. Check out NBEX, check out SSRIA. They're kind of a good beginners or a good list to go look at in addition to the Red List and other ones. All right. I think with that, I will end the recording and wish you all a good day.
Thank you.